Madam Clerk, let's call this workshop to order. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Dieguez.
He's present. He's in the back right now grabbing a bottle of water.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Present.
Councilmember Ruano. Here. Councilmember Alvarez, I know he was in the restroom. Oh, there he is. Councilmember Alvarez is also present. Councilmember Collazo.
He's
here too.
also here.
He's present but in the restroom. Vice Mayor Rodriguez is absent. Mayor Sid.
Present.
Mayor, you have quorum.
It says we have to rise for the moment of silence led by Tony Fernandez. No, a prayer.
Moment of silence. Tony's a man of yours.
Thank you, Tony. Let's all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the
flag of the United States.
States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. Any public comments? Any public comments? Any public comments? Any remote public comments? Any remote public comments? None. I do want to recognize two chairs of our committees that have been here and watching the entire time. That's Tony Fernandez from Youth Activities Task Force and Mama Nancy Rogers in the back, our chair of Public Safety Committee. Mr.
Let me,
I don't know, how about me? You run that risk if you dim the lights.
all right, so we have today before you the 1920 proposed budget overview. As was obvious, some of the numbers in here will be skewed due to the fact that there was a change in the expected revenue from the FP&L franchise fee, but I'll point that out as we go through the presentation. So today, the agenda topics, we're going to look at the proposed budget, including the general fund, with the revenues, expenses, our challenges, the significant changes to the base budget, our fund balance, all of our special revenue funds, our debt service, stormwater, our facilities maintenance fund, and our capital projects. All right. You all have this presentation?
Yes.
Okay. One thing I wanted to point out here, the three areas in yellow are important here. The total millage that we're proposing in the budget is a stagnant millage. It's the same as it was before. And this budget that's before you represents a 4.2% reduction from last year's budget. We have here on this slide, it's very busy, but we have all of the funds that I just detailed for you in the individual columns with the total overall budget at $35.2 million. The general fund in this proposal, the general fund we're proposing to, as you probably heard before, to transfer $420,000 from the MLOP capital fund and also $86,000 from our fund balance. The litigation reserve carry forward is, in this proposal here, is to remain the same at $342,500. Originally, when we looked at austerity measures in the workshop, we had discussed moving $97,000 back into the general fund, leaving the litigation reserve at $250,000. Obviously, with the change in revenue from FPL, that's one of the things that we'll probably have to revisit and look at as we need to cover another $390,000 in lost revenue.
Although, Mr. Manager, I would say that I would encourage you to look at the committee budgets as well, because
As what?
again, excuse me, I would encourage you to take a look at the committee budgets as well, because again, the litigation is only going to ramp up, and I don't, I'm not going to nickel and dime us just as we're about to go toe to toe.
No, I agree. We're going to look at everything. We had developed that list of austerity measures. The committee budgets had already been reduced 40-some-odd thousand dollars, and we had not, in the proposal that you'll see here, we had not proposed to increase that. The only change in the committee budgets was the change that was discussed last week of adding $10,000 back to cover the Special Needs Advisory Council. So obviously, at this point, everything is back on the table, so we'll look at the entire list, and then we'll come back to you at the September budget hearing with a recommendation.
Thank you. And again, with the exception of the 4th of July and the Veterans Parade, I think you should feel free to go as far as you need to.
Mr. Manager, so
Sir.
what's the number again that you had stated that we need to find? 390.
390.
All right, 390. Quick question. Now that you have this slide up, our reserves are at 20%, but they're mandated at 15 by ordinance. What's that difference?
Our reserves are at 19%. With the proposal that we had prepared for you, even with the transfer of the 86,000 that we showed you on the previous slide, that still left us a 19% fund balance.
So what's that 4%? What is that in a dollar?
In dollars?
I have it here. I did the math. $1,054,000 is the difference between 20% and 15%.
I'd have to look. I think.
Wait. So the
No, go
difference
back.
between having our reserves at 20% and having it at the mandated number, that is
15%.
15 million,
$1,054,000.
and we're looking for $390,000.
But remember, we've already taken, that's assuming that we take 420 from MLOP and 150 from the sinking fund.
Okay.
So if you were to add,
That stays down. Those cuts stay.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that reserve, he's saying it's at 19. Even at 19.
Right.
What's that 4% difference?
oh, you got to figure it's
There's
each
a
each
slide in
percentage is each percentage point is about
Excuse me.
$210,000.
Kay has that number.
Hi, Kay Grant,
going home.
Controller.
What's that unrestricted fund balance number?
Okay, so if you take a look at slide 30, right now, our fund balance is actually $3.28 million. And what that includes is $836,000, which the council has directed us to assign for Hurricane Irma disallowance. So including that, what was it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, okay?
Hold it. Let me see if I can find that. Slide 30, Kay, you said?
Slide 30.
Tell me when I'm getting close.
Up
Past-
some more.
Fund balance is at the end, I think.
Fund balance. Actually, you're going in the wrong direction, sir.
I went too far?
I wanted to see it on the thing. Transportation, stormwater, up.
You sure?
Just about right there.
Okay.
Okay, so just to talk a little bit about the fund balance, as per our comprehensive annual financial report at the end of the year, we had fiscal year 2018, our beginning fund balance was $5 million. 2 years ago, the council approved that we assign $836,000 for any disallowances from Hurricane Irma. And so for the carry forward, earlier this year in February, we approved a carry forward of $1.275 million. Including in that $1.275 million was, I believe, $400,000 in legal fees. Now, of that $400,000 in legal fees, we've already spent $58,000. So that leaves us with $342,000. So at the end of fiscal year 2019, we're looking at our fund balance to be $3.28 million.
But Kate, quick question. I know we got good news recently in regards to our disallowances, right? And that number was decreased on the disallowances. I think they had almost everything at 100%. That and that's, I think the manager had sent out an email saying that that staff did a great job and the disallowances had decreased. Now with everything getting the whole obligation.
Yeah, there's two things dealing with FEMA reimbursements. There has been a lot of movement with FEMA reimbursements. I feel weird here talking. So there's been a lot of movement with FEMA. Number one is that there's been a lot of movements. There's been obligations. There's been movement at the state. A lot of that has been through some back channels that were able to be accessed. So it looks like the actual receipt of the final obligation and receipt of the cash is closer better than further away. The second thing is that the impact of that storm reached a level where now the cost share is at a different level. Originally, the cost share was FEMA was paying 75%, the state would pay 12.5%, and the local government would pay 12.5%. So the new information is that now that level has reached an expense level where now FEMA is going to be covering 90%, and then the state will pay 5% and the local government 5%. So the cost share is in a better position. We believe that the final ones that have not been obligated by FEMA will be obligated soon. Once those obligations happen, we believe that a good portion, if not all of the 836,000 will be able to be put back into fund balance. Once that goes back into fund balance, the new number I think was going to be 24%, where our fund balance would go up to 24%. So it's not new money that we find, it's just money that we have earmarked for these disallowances would now no longer have to be earmarked. So that would, our fund balance would increase to 24%. So, but Mr. Mayor, I think that the question you were asking was how much the difference from 15 to 19%. It's the bottom number, 669,000 is the amount of our current fund balance that is unassigned.
So, and I know why, especially finance staff is being very cautious with these numbers, because what happened in 05 with Wilma, right? We thought everything was all good. We got fronted the money, and then we were stuck with a $700,000 payment. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kay.
That is correct.
Years later. So I understand why we have to do this exercise, but hopefully.
Yeah. There's going to come a point in the process where we'll be able to move that $836,000 back into fund balance and recognize it as part of fund balance and not as earmarked for disallowances.
So it goes back to $390,000, or that we need to find.
So the available, excuse me, the available amount from the fund balance reserve to apply to that 390 is a 669.
Right now.
Bottom.
Yes.
And that is assuming that we still take the 420 from MLOP and we still take the 150, or we don't put the 150 towards the sinking fund.
Yeah. All else being equal, from this original proposal, with now having an extra $390,000 gap to fill, 669, but I'm sure my finance team over here is probably wanting to throw a shoe at the back of my head, because there are other reasons, right? It's not only the fact that it's a savings account, and the purpose of having the savings account is to be able to draw on it on years like this.
No, I understand. I'm not proposing that we
Okay.
do that. I'm saying it seems to be that is an idea that's been floated. I don't agree with it.
Okay.
I think we should keep our reserves as high as we can. If if 2005 was any indication, we really should have sufficient funds in there for a disaster.
Right.
The last thing we need to be doing is going out seeking financing to pay costs caused by a natural disaster.
Right.
So here's, and I do want to clarify that. If if it is real category 4 or 5, we will need to get financing to pay for that. Just to be clear, I mean, the amount of money we spent for a Cat 1 was if a storm of the magnitude, if the storm last time would have hit us head on, we would have had to borrow money to pay for that.
Right,
I mean,
which
that
is why I
so
don't
just-
think we
but I mean,
should keep-
Just an FYI, I mean, that's why, either way, regardless of what's in there, you know, and it's a risk. It's always a risk. You never know. Like, we don't know if the storm's going to hit us coming up, but we do know at least we get reimbursed by FEMA.
Yeah, the ultimate solution, may be some blend of a lot of different things. So there's not going to be any magic bullet in this whole thing that's going to solve all our $390,000 problems. So I think it's going to be a combination of a lot of different things. Yes, sir. Did you want me to stay on that slide?
It's just a question to the finance staff, and I don't know if it was I think Kay. If we were to take our fund balance to 15%, would it hurt any of our ratings?
It'll have implications. How grave, I don't know. It would have implications on our bond rating. Our bond rating companies look at our fund balance. They look at, you know, our savings account. So using that much, it would have implications. How severe, I don't know.
But I think what I'm trying to get to is, because I'm not in the finance sector, and I don't know what their thresholds. I know that we've held ourselves to a 15% threshold, but is there a difference between 15 and 16? Is there a difference between 17 and 18? Would it benefit us to go to 20 instead of being at 19? So I don't know, because I know that they don't just look at that one thing in a silo. They look at a myriad of different factors, and it might be negligible, right? If that idea were to be floated, and I know there's no appetite maybe from you, Councilman, but if we were to take the fund balance reserve to 15%, I want to make sure that there's no other unintended consequences other than that amount of money not being there for an unmet need or an unforecasted expense.
Right. And obviously, just doing the numbers, if we have 669 and we don't even need the whole amount, we need 390, even if we cover the entire $390,000 gap with fund balance, it would never take us all the way down to 15. It would always be 16 or 17, still the somewhere in that neighborhood. So, and also understanding that we have that disallowance amount that maybe we can take a step, and maybe so those will be the discussions we'll have over the next few days with the finance team. Maybe the answer is to move that amount that we have for disallowances in FEMA, instead of 836, maybe we take it to 700 or 600 or some other number, as these projects are obligated by FEMA. So maybe the answer is not to go from 836 to 0, but maybe we start moving in that direction by adjusting that number.
Mr. Manager,
Got it.
one.
And, oh, I'm sorry.
I
I had one.
thought you were done. No.
No, I have. Go ahead. Go ahead.
My question was going to be, assuming we did take the 390 from there, how long, you may not even be able to answer this question right now, how long would it take us to repay, ourselves the 390 plus the 420 for MLOP plus the 150 for the sinking fund plus because it's not really 390, right? It's 476 because we're already taking 86,000.
Yeah, the 390 is the marginal difference.
Right.
The additional difference that we would be taking.
So how long would it take us to pay ourselves the 476 plus the 420 plus the 150
Well, now we have a different rate, right? So
At 3%.
at 3%?
it'll take us longer. Yeah. So obviously, I
Thank
think
you.
that we did the math the other night. When we're looking at it at 6%, we could have, before the end of that fiscal year, we would have been able to repay us back the, what at the time was 420 and the 150, and the fund balance was in that same range of about $100,000. So I think by the end of that fiscal year, at the 6%, of fiscal 2021, we would have been able to repay ourselves back. So at 3% and more money, obviously, it would take us a very long time. And actually, at 3%, we'd probably never be able to pay us ourselves back, because at 3%,
That was the answer I
yeah, at
thought you were going
3%,
to say.
at 3%, all we're doing is covering what we normally fund ourselves for general operations. So at 3%, there is no payback of those transfers.
And we would have to find $420,000 from MLOP every year. We'd have to find $150,000 sinking fund, which is never going to come back.
Right.
Thank you.
All right.
And you're also assuming that the costs are going to stay the same. Cost and growth, revenue and expenses usually track. Usually. So what we're doing is assuming, I understand there's one variable, right, which is this building, the payment of this building. That's a variable that is $200,000. It's not.
And new development, we're growing, we're not stagnant, so
But
that's also
I
a
also
variable.
want to interject here, though, where you know, and I understand where everybody's coming from, but where I think Councilman Rodriguez also has a point, is that the reality is that, you know, this council, and I've seen it, you know, and it's not just us up here, I'm talking about over the years. This is the problem with pay-as-you-go. We're not going to stop approving new things. You know, it just hasn't happened. So it's not just the steady increase from inflation of our costs, it's our own self-discipline. No offense to all of us, I don't think it's there. You know, we're going to need to find a way to regularly fund, you know, everything that we're doing with the Special Needs Advisory Board. I know that I've had residents that want us to find more code enforcement officers. If you guys talk to Lourdes, she'll tell you we only have really one guy going around on the weekends for the entire town. And then people wonder why they feel that, you know, we don't have enough code enforcement presence, you know, and I just want, you know, again, at the end of the day, I'm just saying we've got to figure out how do we meet all these needs and how do we stop growing in other areas and perhaps set a new normal with the committees. And that's just a start. You know, I'm using the committees as the easy piñata, but obviously they're not the only ones. As I said earlier, we identified $1.2 million in our sunshine meetings to cut. Half of them went back into the budget. I don't necessarily agree that that should be the case. And in fact, I think there should be, at least for this year, should be brought back to us. And then again, consider other variables. Litigation. We don't know what's going to happen with the Pizzi appeal. We don't know what's going to happen or the true cost of what will happen with the litigation on these bridges, where we're fighting on two fronts in effect. So just, you know, bear that in mind. And I know that, you know, again, I agree. Usually once you give something, it's always harder to take it back. But I'm just, I think both of you guys and lady, you know, all three of you, you know, you're both making valid points. Just also keep in mind that, you know, let's also keep it civil, because I sense a little tension building.
We don't have a resolution to make us do that. There's no resolution to make us do that.
All right.
There's another question. And by the way, I
Sorry.
just read our entire bond rating thing, so if anybody has questions on that, be able to answer.
With respect to the issue that Councilman Rodriguez brought up, and I remember when we switched banks, this was one of the things that the finance department said that they were going to explore, maybe an emergency line of credit for when we had something very catastrophic and we were running into cash flow issues. Is there been any progress on that issue?
Yeah, I mean, we've had, our finance director has made exploratory inquiries to different institutions. We had a meeting the other day with a bond counsel, a gentleman who's a Miami Lakes resident who's been involved in municipal finance at all different levels, whether it's general obligation bonds, special revenue bonds, line of credits, short-term loans and everything, and gave us a lot of great insight, really for free. I don't think he charged us, right? So, and so we're already exploring that, and you know, the Germans got doomed in World War II by fighting too many fronts. So right now the fronts were the budget and the FPL franchise fee, but it's something that you should expect to see before you shortly after the beginning of the new fiscal year is a disaster-related line of credit. And the inquiries that we've made are very positive. They make sense for us. Many of them have no carrying cost. They also have no obligation to draw on them unless it's for related to a disaster. So there are a lot of positive things. So you should expect to see it before you for consideration after the start of the new fiscal year.
So, Council, I just apologize, I keep bringing this up, just for the record. I am in favor with using, just on a year, just for this year, some of those funds to make up the gap. So I just want to make that clear, so. I just read our entire Moody's and Fitch rating from last year, and it says it's strong because it's tied to our electric utility tax. I don't see anything in here that talks about a required number on reserve. There's a required debt. It does say something about on the cash funded debt service reserve fund. I don't know what, I guess that's inside of the electric utility fund or something, but it does say that. But it does not say that it'll impact it by our general reserve.
Yeah,
Because it's tied to, it would impact us if we touch the electric utility tax dollars. That's what I'm reading, unless Kay has a different.
It's a dedicated revenue source, so when you affect that, then you affect the viability of making sure that you can continue to make payments. So we have professionals that give us advice, right? We have a financial advisor who helps us with our bond payments. We have auditors that provide us information. So we'll tap into the resources that we have to make sure that any kind of use of fund balance, whether it be the unassigned fund balance or any portion of the amount that's restricted for FEMA disallowances, the implications of those will come back to you. Before we make a recommendation to you, we'll come back with what the advice has been from our professionals.
Just repeating myself, I prefer to go down this route, so just.
Okay, general fund revenues. That's a pie chart that talks about where the revenues come from. Ad valorem obviously is one of the biggest chunks. Utility taxes, intergovernmental revenues, and reserves. Our property tax roll is obviously trending up. We had the hiccup after the 08-09 time where our property values dipped, and now we've actually gone past where the previous high was. And if you look at the millage rate that we're proposing, which is the same millage rate that we have in this our current fiscal year, we would be the 6th lowest millage rate in all of Dade County. That is the trend of our millage rate, as you could see over the years, which obviously there's effects to this, right? Because even though property values are going up, as we drop the millage rate, then that means that it's a counterbalance to increasing property values. Ad valorem taxes over the years here after the 08-09 dip that was recognized a year or two later. Now we're every year since fiscal 12 has been marginally increasing. Now this slide is a little busy, but it talks about the on real property ad valorem taxes, the breakout between residential and businesses. Residential is the property values is 1.9 billion. And the business is 1.2 billion. So residential properties are significantly more valuable in the town than businesses. That is a sample trim notice, and that the purpose of this here is to show that in the grand scheme of things, this sample here shows a total tax bill of $4,600, but only $600 of it is coming from the town. All the other taxes are related to school board, Miami-Dade County, et cetera, and debt service for other entities, libraries and whatnot. All right, the average assessed value for a property this is for residential only, right? average assessed residential is $283,000. These are some of the other revenue streams that we have. The half-cent sales tax is trending up. The communication services tax, you're going to see that blip in fiscal 14. There was an audit that was conducted in fiscal 14 to make sure that all phone lines that should be attributed to Miami Lakes were in Miami Lakes and being paid to Miami Lakes. So there was now that 1 year blip didn't mean that that's the new normal. It just meant that they went back a certain number of years and then paid it all in that one time period. So we did start to explore if there was a reason to do a subsequent audit to see if we continue to have all the numbers that should be attributed to Miami Lakes in Miami Lakes, and we'll continue to explore that. Our state revenue is obviously trending up, as you can see by this bar graph. Utility services tax. Now, this utility services tax is split up into 3 different utilities. The electric utility tax, which is what is used for the payments here on Town Hall. The original revenue is expected to be about $3 million. Then from there, we're taking off the bond principal. If you can see, then the interest payment and the federal subsidy gets added back, $169,000 from the federal government, and then our service fees, et cetera. So the net transfer to the general fund is $2.4 million. Then the water utility tax is $400,000 and gas is $65,000. So the lion's share of the money under utility services tax comes from the electric utility. Licenses and permits, obviously that's a phenomena related to development. Franchise fees. Obviously this is a number that does no longer pertains. The last red bar is what we had expected at a 6%, $780,000, and the yellow one would have been the projected for fiscal 21 with a 6%. Obviously, these numbers change, and if you look at it, we kind of wanted to show this, that the $2.3 million that would have been projected in fiscal 21 is not really far off from some of the early time periods there. In fiscal 07, fiscal 10, we were in excess of $2 million. So overall, the franchise fee had been trending down. So just the fact that we have 780 in this projection here for fiscal 20, the 2.3 for fiscal 21 was not really a huge aberration from what our previous revenue levels were in 10 or 12 years ago. General fund expenditures. All right, fiscal challenges, you know many of these. The electric utility, the bond principal, the FP&L franchise. This number obviously changes, is no longer just $495,000 less. It'll be $700 and some odd thousand, maybe $800,000. The police patrol services contract increased approximately $200,000, and the CUNIP debt service payment increased by $92,000. Now, this was the list of austerity measures that I had been proposing in this budget. Now, on here, you'll see the committee reductions of $37,000. That was $47,000, but adding back the $10,000. So that number is one that we'll have to take another look at. You have on here deferring the CIP manager, deferring the procurement specialist, a pump at the park. These are all items that we looked at when we went through the entire presentation in the workshop. In this proposal here, in this plan, I was adding back the legal reserves, and that's why you'll see it about 2/3 of the way down. We highlighted it just to make it clear that the $97,000 that we had originally discussed about reducing, I had added it back in this projected plan. So obviously, you see that police and crossing guards, it takes up a big portion of our operating budget in the general fund.
Ed, I have a quick question, and maybe Kay, you could answer us. Why, like right now, I just saw, the QNIP special obligation bond, But the one thing I always see in the CAFR, but I never see in these presentations, is a $3.4 million in pension liability. And FRS liability, it's in the CAFR. That's one of the net pension liabilities. There's always a line in there. Why doesn't that ever show up in these presentations?
Well, all we do is we make the payment to FRS. So really, the liability is, FRS is the one who's obligated to make those payments. If the town were to cease existing tomorrow, the FRS should have adequate funding to make the future stream of payments to employees in the town of Minot Lakes.
My question, but why does it always show up in our CAFR as a big line that is our proportionate share going forward is $3.4 million, and it's grown $400,000 in the last year? Like, why doesn't that ever pop up here? I mean,
Well, this is an expense budget. There's no.
but I saw it I mean, I don't.
It's an expense, and you'll see it in the actual budget lines. There is the contribution that we make annually to FRS for all of our employees.
So, yeah, no, that's why I don't understand. Like, it's laid out in the CAFR clearly, and it mentions it every time, $3.4 million. So explain, I
But
just want to
it's
understand.
not that we pay $3.4 million.
But it's a pension it's a liability.
It's a liability, right. But that is, there's things between a balance sheet and an income statement. Income statement is your inflows and outflows, and your balance sheet are your assets and your liabilities, right?
You passed.
My accounting degree worked. So the pension liability is a liability that would appear on a balance sheet. It's on here in your income statement, which essentially that's what a budget is a pro forma income statement. It just shows your revenues and your expenses.
I get it, but it's an expense that grows every year, and it's out of our control. So I just wanted to point that out again, and
Okay.
so I believe we should opt out of it for new employees. But
I just look stupid. The general fund operating expenses, as you could see, from fiscal 19 to fiscal 20, that's the 4.2. Actually, this is just general fund, because the 4.2 was all of our overall budget. But as you can see, there's a reduction from 17.9 to 17.4. So this is over about $500,000 that we were projecting to reduce the general fund budget for next year. Now, significant changes to the general fund. This here is a spreadsheet that shows the actuals from 17-18. It shows our amended budget this year. It shows column number 3 will show you our year-end projection. And column number 4 shows our proposed budget, obviously under the previous assumptions that we're now going to have to modify. And then 5 shows the variances, and the variance based on amended to proposed, and column 7 shows our year-end projection versus proposed. So there's some different looks at the current state and our proposed budget for next year. If you look at the bottom of column number 3, and I know this was a concern, Councilmember Collazo, about what our next year's budget. We're actually projecting a $168,000 deficit for moving from this fiscal year into next fiscal year. Obviously, a budget, and it's a dynamic thing, right? So it's changing all the time. As revenues, especially there's a handful of revenues that come to us, similar like the FP&L franchise fee. The old way under Miami-Dade County it was that annual payment. So that by itself came in at a little over $140,000 less than what we had projected, what we had budgeted. So those are some of the dynamics that happened even late into the fiscal year.
But I remember when we all started scrambling around January.
Yeah, the starting. Yes, it was. And those, because every time we present, we give you based on information we have. Yes, yes. But remember how this works. What you're looking at there is this fiscal year, that 160. So the number that we were showing you was the starting point for next year, looking at how did it compare to this year's amended budget. So it was a little different. The number, it wasn't our ending point for this fiscal year. It was the starting point for next fiscal year based on how did it compare to this fiscal year.
And I also understand it may change by the
Yes.
end of, by the time we close
Yeah,
out.
we have another 5 or 6 weeks, before the end of the fiscal year, and there may be some adjustments here. Just as a point of reference, public safety, obviously we know it's number one on our strategic plan as far as our priorities. It's a major, our residents expect public safety as number one. They, as a percentage of our general fund budget, they account for just over 50% of our general fund total budget. As a function of ad valorem, it accounts for 117% of our ad valorem. So obviously, general fund revenues are ad valorem plus a lot of other things. But when you're looking at only ad valorem, it's 117% of our ad valorem revenues. Now, this is the slide that we had fast-forwarded to early on in our discussion. Our beginning fund balance is $5 million. We have the $836,000 that we have set aside for Hurricane Irma disallowance. The carry forward from fiscal 18 is $1.2 million, and I think that is semantics, right? Sometimes words matter, right? And the semantics in the past, we have identified that as a surplus, and it's not really a surplus. Operating surpluses and carry forwards are two different things, but I think the reference has been made, and I think it's led to confusion on the part of a lot of our residents that they have looked at carry forward as a surplus, and it's not really a surplus. So we're going to do a better job at looking at carry forward and making a distinction between carry forward and operating surpluses or deficits. So as we said earlier, the ending fund balance in our previous plan was 19% of general fund. All right, special revenue funds. Here we have impact fees, we have building department, we have, I wish I had better eyes, mobility fee, transportation, PTP, and special taxing districts. So the local option gas tax is something that is, is not very stable, but it's obviously over the last 3 or 4 years is trending down. In here, we're projecting that we're going to receive $390,000 in local option gas tax. We have a carry forward from last year, from this current year. We're projecting $9,000 for a total budget next year of $400,000. We're going to allocate that money to sidewalk repair, road repairs and maintenance, sidewalk pressure cleaning, potholes, striping and signs, and there'll be zero in reserves. We're allocating everything towards those projects, which obviously, as we've discussed over and over again, are very important to our residents for quality of life, everyday stuff. The PTP 80, the revenues are expected to be just over $1 million. And they, although very slight, but they are actually trending in an upward direction. So we have $1,080,000 that we're projecting, interest earnings of $10,000, and then our prior year carry forward are $95,000. So we have a budget amount for next year, PTP 80, of $1.185 million. From that money, we're going to allocate towards the 59th Avenue extension, the 67th Avenue widening, the 60th Avenue Business Park East, and street lighting utilities, salary and benefits. In here, a portion of Michelle Gonzalez's salary is paid out of here. Transportation studies, and then the bike path repair. So we've allocated all of the money that we have in next year's budget towards those projects.
Mr. Manager, if I can interrupt you for a second.
Yes, ma'am.
What transportation studies are in that 97? What transportation studies?
We always allocate money because there's always something always comes up. And then we have money budgeted for those studies. So,
So it's not a specific study, it's for for any that might come up?
I
Like if
don't
we tell you
believe-
to
I don't
analyze
believe-
traffic on this road,
Correct.
then it
But
would come
whenever
out of that line item?
whenever there's anything that happens, and they say, okay, we want to do this, we want to put in a calming device, we want to,
Right.
then if we have to do a study, for instance, recently we just completed the study on the reduction of the of the townwide speed
Of the
limit.
speed limit, yes.
All of that would have come out of that budget line.
Okay, perfect.
All right, the PTP 20, which is, has a different purpose, it's also similar to the PTP 80, it's also trending up. We project there to have $270,000 in revenue, freebie advertising revenues of $30,000, and we have a carry forward of $89,000. The freebie service is going to cost us $250,000 next year. Our bus stop shelter, insurance and repairs, $38,000. Traffic studies there again are going to be different traffic studies of $20,000 we allocated there. The other half of Michelle's salary, promotional activities, and there'll be a small amount that's left over to just leave in reserves to carry forward.
Mr. Manager, I could have sworn, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought we were projecting a higher number on the advertising revenue side when we were discussing the freebie modification of hours 2 months ago. I thought we were projecting a higher number.
I think that with the change in hours, first of all, there is the bus, I believe, there's still advertising space available on it, but it hasn't been sold. So we're kind of projecting for budget purposes on a conservative basis. We're looking at what we have sold, and even though the capacity may be greater, that and that's why Michelle in that study, I think, talked about added revenues from advertising that we're going to try and attain, but this is the sure thing, which is advertising space that's already for sure sold out.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Manager, may I?
Yes, ma'am.
Councilwoman, to answer Councilwoman Ruano's question regarding the studies, the transportation studies, we have Northwest 155th Street feasibility study, as well as Ferry Drive pedestrian vehicle study, as well, budgeted for next year.
Thank you.
All right, mobility fee, and this was something that collectively we talked about when I first got hired here, and mobility fee, there were plans being, money for mobility fee revenues were being attributed to projects, and then a lot of these projects, as we've seen, Lucida, Alari are projects that have been on the drawing board for quite a while, and they keep getting delayed, right? But then we have been budgeting them for certain projects, so we've done a better job of not really allocating mobility fee revenues until the projects are very, very close to kicking off the ground, when they're already in the permitting process, and and they're already starting to move forward. So we believe that mobility fee revenues next year will be restricted to Lucida and Alari, even though other projects may be on the drawing board and in discussion, but we want to again be conservative, and if we were to get revenues in mobility from other projects, then we'll reallocate them. But here, we're using mobility fee to fund part of 60th Avenue project, and then we have a reserve for future projects. Yes.
During the technology seminar, and there was a couple people that were present, but in particular Michelle was present, and I think the issue of the mobility fee came up, and she gave us an update that you guys are currently working with a consultant because some of the projections are not aligning with kind of how the original intent was. And she said that maybe around September, or I don't recall. Councilwoman Ronald, do you remember what the timeline was when the mobility fee conclusion of that?
She told me September, October, we should have that back. That is a rates they're looking mostly on the calculation of the rates. We're also looking at the actual ordinance to see if there are modifications to the ordinance that need to be made. So it's a two-prong look at because now that the mobility fee has had a certain number of years of experience, now they're looking to see if it's working, if it's not working. And so
going back to the mobility fee and how you're extrapolating, obviously, you're not basing it on that new rate. This
Correct. This is
the
based
old
on
rate.
the
So
current system.
if that mobility fee changes, and there's a significant change to it, and that new rate changes, obviously, this calculation will change as well?
Yes, these numbers are based on the existing calculation and the existing ordinance.
Got it.
All right, impact fees. Impact fees, we have park impact fees. Some of it is for park improvements. Some of them are dedicated for open space. We have public safety impact fees and road impact fee in lieu of payments in lieu of road impact fees. The park improvement, again, the two projects that we're projecting that will come in next fiscal are Lucida and Alari. That'll bring in $175,000 in park improvement impact fees. We have 65 in carry forward. And then right now, we have that attributed to reserves. And this was something that we put an asterisk and we put the statement at the bottom, which was something that we just had it as a consideration, that it may be money that can be attributed to the MLOP master plan to supplant the money that we're now transferring in our plan. So it's just something that we put there as an idea for discussion at a later date. The impact fee park open space, Lucida and Alari again, 175. We have a carry forward amount of $1,082,000 for total revenues of 1.2. So in here we have our dedicated expenditures, 150 for the design of Part 3, and then reserves for future projects 1.1, and that's the funding source that Parks and Recreation are looking for using for the bridge project, for the bridge park.
I mean, with the Part 3, I'd also like to see that either rolled into the bridge park or, perhaps replacing the MLOP money. Is that permitted? Because
what?
That money, the $150,000 for designing the Part 3, which is probably not going to happen anytime soon.
It's open space, so there's different rules that this money cannot be
Correct.
used for a place like Miami Lakes Optimist Park, because that's a recreational park.
Okay, but for the bridge park, that could be rolled into that, correct?
This money, 1.2 million, or
No,
for sure
the
1.1.
The 150, can we roll that into the bridge park?
Yes.
It's yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
money that
that's
we have
just
there.
a line on a piece of paper that we've dedicated, we've allocated 150,000 for the design of the Part 3, but if the Part 3 is years and years out, we
Yeah,
can reallocate that money towards the bridge
Yeah,
park.
exactly. To me, it doesn't make sense to move forward on design for that one. We still have all these questions about where we're at with some of the concerns we've had with the property. Obviously, we have other projects that are much more pressing concern between the bridge park and the Optimist, So, I mean, the Part 3, to me at least, is several years away.
Yes.
So just wanted to throw that as something else that we can perhaps roll into the bridge or as a potential use for the bridge park, just, to have to put in less money from financing.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
The public safety impact fees, we expect to receive $66,000 in the coming year. The carry forward is 77, and all of that is earmarked for fixed LPRs in the future. The projects in lieu of road impact fees, the contribution from Town Center is all going towards the 67th Avenue widening project, and that's $273,000. All right, building department, we have our building permit revenues at $1 million. Some of the other revenue sources from the Lucida apartments, some of these other sources we expect, and plus the carry forward of 2.5. Total revenues in there will be 3.9 in the building department.
Let me ask you, Ed, and I know I had asked this question before, and Kay, do you know historically, how much have we given from general revenue to the building department all these years? I know now is when they're making, they're actually cutting even, but for a long time, the general revenue sustained a portion of the building department. Do you know how much what that number is? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, top of your head, just a guess.
We looked at that already once.
The microphone's off.
But okay, correct me if I'm wrong. Since the building fund was its own standalone special revenue fund,
Which was about 2 years ago, yes.
the general fund has never contributed or offset any of the costs from.
Nothing at all. Not within the last 3 years since it became its own
Not
special
within,
revenue.
Not within the last three, but I remember before, it was constant, and the issue was, somebody had said that they got a legal opinion that they couldn't reimburse, because I would always talk about that. I was like, yeah, I remember one year, I think it was like 60,000 or whatever, that went from general revenue to the building department, but the building department wasn't allowed to reimburse. I know there's cities around Florida trying to change that, the town, so I remember having that
haven't looked
discussion
into
back
that.
in 2013 or 14, but I just wanted to make a point of that, because, you know, somebody had said there was a state law, a state statute that building departments weren't allowed to reimburse. That our general revenue could go that way, but building department revenue couldn't come back this way as reimbursement. So I don't know if that was true or not, but I remember that discussion being had. 'Cause
We
this
could
will
look
be a
into
good
it
year for that to
further.
happen, so.
All right, so those are the revenues for the building department. The expenditures here, it's a balanced budget. Personnel expenditures, operating expenditures, and it totals 3.9 for the operations of the building department. Special revenues, developers' contribution for education, this 300,000, which is something that was from the Satori development, and is something that I'll be bringing forth, you know, the discussion as to, I know it's supposed to be intended for education, but it seems to me that this money is just sitting there, so it may be, I don't know if there's an intended purpose for that money. Somebody had, just in conversation, had said, yeah, the Educational Advisory Committee is supposed to decide what that money is going to be used for. I don't know if that's accurate or not, so
If
I don't know the history on the...
If I recall correctly, and I have well, I mean, I'm sure that you have it too, the agreement that was made with Lennar.
Yeah, I can
It was supposed to be used for the schools of impact, which at that moment were Bob Graham Education Center and Barbara Goldman Senior High.
All right, but it's not through the Education Advisory Committee?
No.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a look at that and see if we can, because it doesn't make sense to have that 300,000 just sitting there.
I know you can. We had the discussion, I don't know if you remember, Councilman Mingo, when he was here before, had talked about this, and I remember the committee came and said, hey, give us a chance. We're going to come up with a plan, because he had even said, hey, maybe it's time for us to get a waiver from this agreement or something to see if we can use it. So, but I remember, I don't know if you were on the dates, but I remember the committee coming and saying, hey, look, give us an opportunity to come up with a plan, and we will, so.
Was the committee charged with
Yes.
finding
Yes.
a use for this money?
I don't recall if the committee was charged with it, but I don't think that the agreement stipulates that the Education Advisory
I
Board...
don't. Internally, I think the town, or the board, or the
I
council...
remember the committee had even come up with an idea to build a cafeteria, an enclosed cafeteria at Bob Graham, and
I
don't
do
know
remember
what.
that. Yes, I do
Yeah, and
remember that.
I don't know what happened.
Okay.
with
We're
all that, so.
we're going to come up with a plan for that money and bring it back to you for consideration. And the Black Olive removal program, there's $37,000 there, and that's almost, I guess it's a dormant program going on.
Mr. Manager, going back to the Black Olive Removal Program, a couple months ago, we looked at a best practice that the city of Coral Gables was adopting to treat the black olive trees so they would not release that sap. And I just wanted to see, and I know that this program is funded at $37,000. I know that we talked about treating the entire town for that sap issue was about $25,000, but we were going to get staff feedback. Could we look at maybe a pilot project where rather than removing the black olives, we try to treat them like the city of Coral Gables does to kind of preserve the tree canopy and see if maybe those monies could be used
I
for
think,
that, or-
Danny, the Parks Department, you have taken a look, I don't know if you've completed your analysis, but I believe that the treatment, and the treatment is a recurrent treatment. It's not a one-time and forever type of treatment. I think that the treatment has to be every X number of years.
Right, and I think what the city of Coral Gables did is they started off with a small pilot, and they looked at its impact over a sequence of, I think, about 5 years. And I think they saw that they first started off with a few trees. They saw, well, it's okay. And they grew it and they grew it. But I wanted to see if it's something that would warrant us replicating here. Because I know that every time that we cut a tree down, whether it's an invasive or it's a specimen tree, we get a lot of feedback that wasn't the direction, the residents in the area feel that that wasn't the direction that we're going. So I think when we looked at what Coral Gables was doing, we may have an opportunity to test it on a very small scale to see if it's a worthwhile endeavor. And I just wanted to see if those funds would be applicable to testing that idea and making a 5-year commitment to, instead of treating the, and I forgot what the inventory is, I don't know, it's 14,000 trees we haven't, how many, what's the
So
inventory?
black olives, we have approximately 3,000 around
How many?
town. 3,000.
3,000. So instead of treating all 3,000 trees, maybe treating 300, because I know it's 25 per tree, you know, could we start getting a barometer of, is that investment worthwhile in lieu of removing the black olives? Because I think the issue that we're trying to deal with is the sap, not necessarily the tree. We don't find that the tree is the issue. It's the sap or the tannins that are released because of this caterpillar. And, you know, is it a worthwhile investment? So I didn't know if that money could be used for that or not.
Danny? Kay, that 37,000 came originally from general fund?
No, it is from permits. Sorry. No, the $37,000 is from permits and
From
removal.
tree permits?
Tree permits, yes, that's
So-
correct.
But it's tree permits that it didn't come through the general fund?
It didn't come through the general fund.
Okay.
No.
So there are no, but any restrictions are we're self-imposed, right? They're just internal restrictions? We can use it for whatever this council believes is good practice?
We have an ordinance, I
Okay.
believe, regarding black olive removal.
That may restrict
I'd
it.
have to double-check the ordinance.
Okay. We'll come back with information on. Danny, we took a look at Coral Gables?
Yeah, so just to update Councilman Collazo, so we did have a meeting with the current vendor that Coral Gables is using. We did a ride-along. They did provide a proposal. Their price point per tree is a little bit higher because our black olives are a little bit more mature. But what I'm trying to do now is schedule a meeting with the city of Coral Gables, and I believe, Councilman Collazo, you wanted to kind of do a drive-along to see how effective that program is in the city of Coral Gables. In our consultations with the consultant, they said it has a 85 to 90% success rate yearly. And we are approaching that idea of doing a pilot program, something that's within our procurement threshold of probably utilizing $25,000 of that and going into when the season starts. It's the blooming season that usually starts in March. We already have a lot of properties that are a constant request to get this treated. So we're trying to identify that, build that, and then schedule that right along with you, hopefully in the next upcoming month with the City of Coral Gables, and take action moving forward if we can utilize these funds.
I'm all in, and I think, you know, we've identified the funding source, and if we can do it, if we can spread it out to those hotspot areas and treat it also with some longevity, like not 1 year, not 2 years, maybe commit to 3 years to hit those trouble spots, we might be able to find a low-cost solution, which is not cutting down the trees in our tree canopy.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, can I?
No, just
Go ahead, go ahead.
quick. The only thing that I asked, because I got a call from somebody that told me that liquid that comes out of that, it hurts dogs. So they said there's a way to do it, so I just want to put it on the record.
The treatment, the liquid from the treatment?
Yeah, because once they inject it, supposedly it seeps out that you're supposed to, like, I don't know, do something, because the dogs lick it and end up getting in trouble later on. So yeah, I had somebody tell me that.
Keep the dogs in the yard where they belong.
Well, somebody did call me when we moved forward with that.
I just wanted to
Councilmember
ask Danny, what are we doing with respect to the residents that that cut trees that they're not supposed to cut down, with residents that remove black olives or remove oak trees?
So we do have a tree protection ordinance, and whenever we do get a complaint that somebody did remove it down, code enforcement's out there, they're issuing a fine, and we're also making that in order to mitigate the loss of the canopy as well, too.
Okay, so that fine can be used for this program, perhaps, to fund this program?
Kate, the civil violation notices that code enforcement, the revenue that they get from the tickets, that goes back into the general fund?
General fund.
It goes into the general fund. Okay, and
But from general fund, we can do whatever we want
Correct.
with it, right? If it's not
Correct.
earmarked if we didn't need it for something else, if it's extra revenue that we weren't counting on.
perfect. And how successful is that? Are we at finding those individuals that?
I would say we're pretty successful. We have a very active citizenry. that love trees, so they're actively giving us notice, hey, and sometimes we catch them in the act, where they don't completely remove it, they're just hat racking it, which that
Correct.
warrants a fine as well too.
Correct.
And we have our arborists monitor that tree to make sure that, I mean, even though it probably loses its structural integrity, at least it grows back and grows some type of canopy.
Perfect. I spoke to the previous manager about this, and there was, I guess, some unclear information on whether if you cut down 3 trees, if one residence cut down 3 trees in the swale in front of their house, was that 1 fine or 3 fines? Is it per tree or is it per occurrence?
So the way that the statute reads, according to fines, is per occurrence. Because it's irreversible. That's an irreversible, irreplaceable type of fine. So it has to happen per occurrence.
Per
So if you have
occurrence?
one resident that chops down 3 trees, you get 3 fines.
3 fines.
So,
Okay.
yeah, per tree.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, debt service. We have 4 different debt services. The special obligation bond for the construction of this facility here. We have a CUNIP bond that the county issued for improvements to the pocket parks. That CUNIP bond matures in 2024. We have a stormwater utility revenue bond that was also issued by the county that also matures in 2024. And then a FEMA-funded stormwater drainage project bond, and that also was issued by the county and for canal dredging, secondary canal dredging. The debt service for this building, for the special obligation bond, the principal in next year is going to be $380,000. The interest is $520,000. I think we saw this slide already, or portions of this slide. Then the federal subsidy that money we get back, $169,000, and our total bond payment is $732,000. The 3 county-issued bonds, the general fund pays for the CUNIP bond, $141,000. Stormwater utility, the stormwater fee pays for the other 2, $70,000 and $15,000. The stormwater utility that we had discussions about earlier, it obviously is trending up I guess from the usage side, because the fee has not changed. Carlos, right? When was the last time the fee was changed? 15 years ago. And it's a fixed dollar fee, so it's not a percentage, it's a fixed dollar amount. And so the total revenues from it are increasing, so obviously that's consumption-based. The revenues from the stormwater are $1.1 million. What we plan to use it for is the Royal Oaks Drainage Improvement Project, the canal maintenance, roadway and drainage cleaning, the debt service, stormwater rate study. That's the study that I told you. Currently, it's at $4.50 per ERU, and that's the study that's going to look and see whether that is the right number to look at going forward. Salary and benefits, some of the salary and benefits from Public Works are paid out of there. Our administrative costs, and then nothing is left over for reserves. Yes.
So because just curiosity, a couple slides back, and I don't know if Carlos can opine on it. What happened in 14? Just like $120,000 drop, and it was just curious because you said it's a usage-based, but it was just a curious little.
Yeah, it looks like there's a $120,000 dip. Carlos, I know you weren't here at that time, right? You weren't here in 14, right? So do you know what that aberration, or that, we can find out for you, council member.
And then on the expense side, I know we have the fund, the Royal Oaks Drainage Improvement. Again, going back to some of the residents that have been having their homes kind of have the water encroachment issue, is any of that covered in the Royal Oaks Drainage Improvement?
I think we answered that to some of their concerns. We looked at that's the current Royal Oaks Drainage Improvement Project. I think that, we've had several pockets of residents complaining about their street. I don't believe that, well, you go ahead. You have to give it a second to turn on. There you go.
I think to answer your question is whether the ones that came here the last time were from Northwest 83rd Place, the ones that had the big drainage problem. The Royal Oaks project currently under construction does not cover that street. So I think that was what you were.
So that you hit it right on the head. So that those people that we identified that were having that issue at that meeting, where is it along and in the master plan, and how much would it be? And I'm not putting you on. I don't want to put you on the spot. If you don't have the information, you don't have the information. I'll revisit it with the manager. But I'm just curious to see how much would it cost to solve an issue like that.
Carlos, I believe that street is not on the new update of the Stormwater Master Plan, correct?
We added that street. When we adopted the Stormwater Master Plan, I think the previous, we also added the 11th projects that were identified in the Stormwater Master Plan, but we also added 83rd Place, 155th Street, 166th Street. I think those are some of the streets that were flooded recently, so we added, we're now up to 14 projects that we added.
We set out a timeline. Did we say that's because it's a 10-year plan, right? This current update that just was approved, is it year 1, 2, 3, 10? Do we know those streets that the council member's asking about?
The first 11 projects were on a 1 to 10 year. The other ones we just added to the plan. I guess we left where we think we left it off was we're going to go back and look at all the projects and then reprioritize them, because there were some streets that were more severe than others.
Okay. And I know we also identified that as an issue we're going to champion in Tallahassee this year? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it'll come before you in September that there's the legislative priorities, and it's some of the drainage projects that were put forward for seeking appropriations from the state. They're going to be recommended again to resubmit.
I had a question. So assuming annually that we don't get these appropriations from the state, what we have available for infrastructure, stormwater related projects is $165,000 a year?
No.
For infrastructure projects.
I mean, drainage also, like roadway and drainage cleaning.
That's the cleaning. That's a
yeah,
maintenance.
but that's part of the drainage
No, but
program.
he's talking
No, I'm
about
talking
new
about
projects.
new infrastructure projects. For example, these residents whose houses are flooding.
Yes.
Assuming we get $0 in state appropriations, what we have annually for those types of projects is $165,000?
Carlos, that's accurate, right?
That 165 is allocated to the Royal Oaks drainage improvement project that
Yeah,
is
but-
currently under construction.
Right, but it's zero. Everything else is zeroed out.
But everything, all the other dollars are allocated to different things that are recurring annual things. So for specific drainage projects, the amount of money from the $1.1 million that we had available for a drainage project was $165,000.
Yes.
Okay.
No wonder our stormwater plan is 10 years long. There's no way we can pay for those types of projects. I understand we rely a lot on the state's appropriations, but that's not guaranteed money.
Ed,
Sir.
quick question, and Kay, why did the building department become a special revenue fund?
I don't believe it's a state statute, but Lorenzo can tell us a little bit more about that. The building department becoming
Yeah, why did we
Special-
make them a special revenue fund? Because I'm
I want to say it's not a statute. It's a,
Okay, because here's, I'm just kind of seeing this. I know their expenses has gone up, but they're not doing capital projects. They're doing operations. And they have, just based on what they're projected on staff costs and what they have, and what the total revenues are this year, they have a surplus of $1.7 million. The building department has. So, I mean, I see that.
what I can tell you that they're restrictive funds. It can only be used for building operations,
Okay.
only.
Originally, we spoke, when we had asked questions earlier, they were originally in general revenue.
Yes.
Okay. That changed because we voluntarily, the town, made them a special revenue fund?
Not the town voluntarily, no.
Okay,
There must have been some trigger to make that happen. And we'll find out exactly what that trigger was, and we'll
I'm s- Is that what?
But
Yeah,
I
but
think I
that
remember.
I know, when I first got here, the building department was not, I remember, it was not making money like they're making now, and it was not, I'm just making that observation, because if we voluntarily made it a special revenue fund, they're not doing
It
capital
wasn't
projects. They're not
voluntary,
doing
no.
their
It's a
$1.7
state
million.
statute.
It was triggered by a change at the state?
It's a state statute, yes.
Well, but look, it could have been an accounting decision, right? Because if the state says that revenues for the building department only can be used for building department operations, and it was all blended into the general fund, for accounting simplicity, maybe we just created a special revenue fund and let it stand on its own merits. Does that make sense? We'll find out the history, and I'll get back to you with the, how it happened and why it happened. Okay? The Facility Maintenance Fund, the contributions to this fund come from the Building Department, from the Police Department, and then all other departments, they contribute to this fund. From here, we're paid salaries and benefits, utilities for all of our facilities, and repair and maintenance and supplies for all of our facilities. Capital projects. Capital projects, we have here $11 million in reserves, in capital projects. The funding sources are coming from grants, PTP, impact fees, general fund contributed $152,000. Stormwater, in lieu of all these other revenue streams here are shown, $11.1 million. From here, we have $514,197. Now, this is the amount after having removed the $420 for the MLOP. So this is money, and this is exclusive. It's only park impact fee money that's left in that MLOP fund. The MLOP storage facility has $188,000 for that reconstruction. The Part 3 design that we spoke about a few minutes ago, $150,000. The Bridge Park has $140,000 allocated to it already in the capital fund. And then we have a $23,000 contingency, and then you see there the $420 that we're going to transfer to the general fund. The West Lakes roadway and drainage project, $1.9 million, and the Royal Oaks drainage and roadway and drainage project phase 1. The 59th Avenue, right now there's $5.3 million in there. Safe routes to school, $800. Business Park East, 60th Avenue, that we just kicked off a few days ago, $800,000. And then the Palmetto 67th Avenue widening. That's the end of our presentation. So the next steps are Tuesday, the 10th. We have our first budget hearing at the midway through our council meeting, and then the second budget hearing will be September the 24th. Obviously, there's some changes that we need to make based on the decision on the FPNL franchise fee. We're not going to be meeting, you're not going to be meeting as a group unless something happens between now and then. So if in the next few days, because it has to be posted by Wednesday, Kay? So the budget has to be posted to the town's website next Wednesday for the following Tuesday's hearing. So if between now and next Wednesday, any of you have input, recommendations on how to, what your preferences are, on how to cover that $390,000 gap, send them my way, and then we'll incorporate your thoughts into our proposal that'll be before you on the 10th of September.
With respect to, there was one item that I was trying to see if I could find it in the budget, and maybe it's just, it's been shifted around. I know that we had some money set aside for the senior center, which may or may not be coming online.
We've already explored discussions with the Grahams about them doing it as part of their project and doing the build-out so that they wouldn't just give us the shell, they'd actually do the build-out and see what the cost would be and see if the money, which I think is $500,000, see if we can get a better deal having their contractor do the shell, do the build-out and everything, and see if we can get, you know, through cost efficiencies through that, and see if we can get that dollar amount reduced. It's $500 that we have set aside for that project. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So I also, Councilman Collazo, when I was talking about legislative priorities, one thing that I noticed in the last budget, and the governor actually signed it, 2 municipalities that were a lot smaller than us got their senior centers fully funded. Miami Springs got 800-something thousand for their senior center, and Sweetwater got 500-something thousand for their senior center. And those are 2 cities a lot smaller than us. I mean, a lot smaller, significantly smaller than us. So just,
I do not have any hesitation in putting that in as a legislative priority. My understanding, though, is that that's taking a little longer to come online. So I don't know if it'll be ready for the legislative season. And but definitely that would be one of the targets that we'd go after.
Yeah, just because we've already mentioned it a couple times. With regard to legislative priorities, the Tony, myself, and the mayor had a telephone conference with the state lobbyists. We went over the lay of the land, the mood, the atmosphere in Tallahassee, what things we should focus on, things we should not focus on, funding levels, et cetera. And we should have something as far as recommendations that we can put before you, hopefully at the September meeting. I'll have to see if we can have it ready by then. There's one element that we're still waiting on, and hopefully we'll have it before you for you guys to consider and adopt. And one of the elements in that was the senior center. So that's one of the funding appropriation requests. In September, yes. They recommended that the mayor and I go up in the second round of committee weeks in October. I guess there's 3 different rounds, I think September, October, and November, and they recommended that we go up and do an initial round of visits in the October committee week. So,
Ed.
Sir.
One last thing. All these units that surround the town hall, will they be already online to collect the franchise fee, the 3%, within this year, or will it be for the next following year?
The Grahams?
Yeah.
The Grahams don't pay the mobility fee.
The franchise.
The franchise fee.
Will all those units be in?
Once they get occupied and they start paying an electrical bill, they start paying the franchise fee.
Okay.
Right.
So
the taxes is what takes a little longer. It takes them a couple years to come on the tax rolls. But the franchise fee, the moment they turn on a meter and they start you're consuming electricity, they start paying.
Were those projections including all these units or not taken into account?
I think the revenue projections were based on what they know, what they have, because they base it on historicals. So if there's more units come online, then that would just be added revenue.
QSL.
Any further questions? Seeing none, this meeting's adjourned. Have a good night.